Yo, what is up? Welcome to Ninja Geek Games. The lands of Vaala are ravished by war, and what could possibly make things worse? Well, dragons can. Have you not watched a Game of Thrones? Every 27 years, which is quite a specific time frame, these reptilic fiends rise and wreak havoc throughout the mortal world, where the warring regions rally and redirect some of their own pent-up aggression. Lords of Vaala is a 1 to 4 player asymmetric area control game where you represent one of 4 factions belonging to an experienced general and their forces, or a fearsome and powerful dragon. During the game, you'll need to secure locations, fight in deadly combat and claim power to show dominance. But the tides of battle can quickly change as both dragons and generals form an inseparable bonds, becoming formidable allies. The components are really nice. That include a large double-sided game board depicting the land of Vaala and its various regions. One side of the board shows a detailed pastel and vintage-like map, and the other is in full colour, highlighting forts, forests and mountains. The map is divided into multiple named regions, and although it's decorated with forests, rivers and citadels, it's only these mountain icons that have a game effect during play, as well as the oceans, as they can be utilised in some movement actions. Each player in the game represents a faction controlled either by a general or a dragon. Generals are Olaria and Tiberia, and the dragons are Fjorgen and Magnifex. Each faction comes with its own player board, deck of action cards and a finely detailed miniature, although the dragons are not so mini. The generals have a small army at hand represented by 3 unit types that are sword dudes, pointy stick men and long-faced gallopers. Each player board has an area where claimed power tokens are stored, and this is how the game is won. These are the faction actions that players can take, and the generals have a card slot area where unit upgrade cards can be placed. The dragons have a wound track that correlates with combat strength, and any units that they've destroyed in combat are stored here that can be traded in for power. The game also includes separate decks specific to controlled regions and unit upgrades for generals, as well as event cards that are drawn each round. The components are of a really good quality. I love the colouring and the artwork, and one of your toughest decisions is deciding on which side of the board to play on. Antique, vintage map or full colour, both are awesome. The miniatures are fantastic, really well detailed, and although oversized, they just look great on the board. It would have been nice to have some thicker cardstock for the player boards, but they're still pretty decent, and I like the colouring, as well as the artwork on the cards, where the game has great table presence. So, how does the game play? Do the dragons soar through the sky, eating sword dudes and using spears as toothpicks, or do the generals send forth their units to bring back some dragon skin to make fine boots? Not quite, it's actually far more strategic. The game involves card play, tactical movement and unit deployment, as well as combat in order to claim power tokens that are placed on the board at setup. Not only that, players will need to contend with neutral units at various locations, and the possibility of forming unbreakable alliances through the Dragon Bond. Sounds ominous. Let's take a look. At the start of the game, the map is littered with neutral tokens, power tokens, and each dragon and general starts in a specific region, with the generals accompanied by their units. Each round is split into 3 phases, where in the first phase, players take turns choosing an action card to play. First, an event card is played, and then players take turns placing one of their cards on top. This goes on until players run out of cards or a player passes, in which case another event card is placed. During the resolution phase, this deck is turned face up and players take turns resolving the event cards and carrying out the actions on their cards in the order that they were placed. Each action card has a number of glyphs that are iconic representations of the actions, and the owner of the card can carry out all of these actions. These are vast and vary between factions, but generals can expand their armies by adding units to the board, miniatures can move into other regions, power tokens can be claimed, and combat can be initiated. Now, I really like this turn mechanic of placing cards one at a time into an ordered deck, so essentially your actions are locked. You'll also need to remember what you placed previously, which is not always easy to do, and you do learn this the hard way. Also, you may need to second guess what an opponent may plan, as cleverly selected action cards can somewhat negate the next player's turn, which is always fun to do. The mechanic reminds me of Colt Express, but the strategic element is fundamental here. The first and last thing that happens in this phase is resolving an event card. These can add power tokens to the map, allow players to carry out free actions, and add neutral units to the board. I think the asymmetric actions in the game are carried out very well. Dragons can heal and move to adjacent regions, but generals are able to increase their army, move them around, and gain power based on their strength, which is pretty cool. Combat is quick and fast paced and involves dice rolling, but is effective in its execution. The number of dice rolled is dependent on the number of units a general controls, gaining more if they have variations in unit type, whereas a dragon's combat strength is related to its current health. Combat is very simple to take out. If you've taken the required action and moved into enemy territory, you roll your dice and apply the critical hits immediately. Then the defender rolls dice and both factions take damage. If units from both sides remain, then this process is carried out again. What I like here is that although simple, you can make use of defensive positions. If the attacker needs to cross a mountain region to attack, the defender ignores a hit, but this doesn't apply to dragons as they can fly. Also, if the defender is in a city location, then they can again ignore another hit. Combat is effective, and due to its simplicity there is very little downtime, so doesn't interrupt the flow of the game. Players do have the option to retreat, either for another advantage or due to cowardice. But generals can get boxed in, as they must go to uncontrolled areas, which becomes difficult if another general has been savvy with their unit deployment. Dragons are more or less fine to retreat, as they never control areas and so can sit in the same region as other factions. They're just flying around the sky, so it's quite thematic in that respect. If you force miniatures to retreat, you can steal power tokens from the other player. Also, dragons can claim destroyed units and trade them in for power later on. At the end of a round, all players get their full hand of action cards back to use again. However, the generals can also claim a named region card for each region that they control, and these can be played just like an action card. These are all the same, but give generals a few more options when playing actions. They can gain an upgrade card to give a permanent ability to that type of unit. They can reinforce their army by placing more units in regions that they control, and place cities, making the region more defensible in combat. During the game, players can also claim Vaala cards that are unique to each faction and spend power tokens to activate them. Power tokens are not removed, they're just flipped over on the player boards, but this does mean that you'll have less tokens available to spend as play continues. But these cards can be used as and when you need them and can provide big advantages to your actions. The game ends when one player has claimed 10 power tokens, but if any time a general and a dragon are alone in a region, they must attempt to dragon bond. Here, both players roll one die each and become bonded if they both roll any form of hit symbol. However, if a player doesn't like the result, then power can be spent to re-roll. So why bond? Well, you have no choice. You must attempt this, and if bonded, the alliance cannot be broken for the remainder of the game. Perhaps the enemy was close to winning. Bond with them and you share the victory if they win. Maybe they have no power to spend and you do, so you can risk re-rolling your bond attempt to their dismay. You'll also get to make use of Dragon Bond's unique abilities for those players. These include gaining combat strength as well as advantages to movement. I quite like the Dragon Bond mechanic. It means you have no option but to carve a way to victory for the both of you. Or maybe you were feeling boxed in, but the enemy is now your ally. It doesn't happen every game, but it's pretty cool when it does. I really enjoyed this game. It has some simple blended mechanics that fit together well, and I think the theme's great. At first, I wrongly assumed it would play as a random handful of actions, but the game and card play become very structured in its approach. The only complaint I do have is that the rulebook isn't great. Actions aren't explained well, just the concepts of combat and area control. The actions are better explained on the player board glyphs and in the glossary at the back of the book, so it makes learning the game a bit difficult. But there is an example of play available online for the game that is a big help, and I definitely suggest you look into this. One of the elements I was very impressed with is the AI system. The game must always be played with 4 factions. Any free factions at setup are turned into an AI player called the Faceless, so if playing solo there are 3 faceless factions. This uses the reverse side of the player board and have slightly different actions available for each glyph. This is cleverly done, moving miniatures towards areas of greatest power or giving options based on availability, and it works very well at 1, 2 or 3 players. Dragon bonding with the Faceless also provides the same benefits as it does with an actual player. I think Lords of Vaala is a solid game at all player counts. It tips a fine balance of a light to medium weight area control game with slick mechanics and little downtime, and does this very well. Here, the asymmetric faction abilities and unique cards are key that become quite an integral part of the game. If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. This is Ninja Geek Games. Cheers.